Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Motion Design Hotline. I'm one of your hosts, Evan Abrams, joined as usual by our other hosts, Kyle Hamrick. Kyle, how you doing today?
Great. Just for clarification, we are not at Sundance. That looks fun and exciting, but
Yeah. We don't go to a lot of places.
well, speak for yourself. I arguably go to too many places.
That's true. Yeah. But today, the place that we're going to be going is into the imaginations
Podcast
of
town.
Yeah. A kind of audio-only landscape where sound waves are assailing us or something like that. I don't know. We'll figure it out. But
Yeah, I think if you do want to lean into that experience during the show, you could just close your eyes.
Right. Yeah. If you want to experience this show as a podcast, stop watching and start listening. So anyway, I want to say hi to CJ, hold it down in the chat. Robert Verneberg, hello. Umacorn, what's going on? L3RD, Oliver Andrews, Marcia, hey. See some new names out there. Brian Smith and Kyle Motion. Kyle, there's a rival Kyle over on YouTube.
Well, I know that, Kyle. It's acceptable.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So today, like we said, we hinted at, we danced around. We're going to be talking about podcast promos. If you're in the chat and you have a podcast, let us know. We were going to take an informal poll. Kyle, how many people do you think watching right now have a podcast?
117% of them.
Okay, perfect. Good. Yeah, because some people would have more than one. So that
Right.
counts. That counts
Exactly.
double. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. But yeah, if you have a podcast, let us know. We want to know about it. This is the rare opportunity. I will ask someone what their podcast is about. So we're doing.
Do we have to tell them about our podcast?
Yeah, we could just make oblique references to us having the podcast.
Okay. I mean, I do actually have one of the promos for that podcast. It's sort of in my prepped to show bin, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah, that's true.
If everyone behaves themselves.
If you're all good, we'll tell you about our podcast. Even if, you know what, if you're bad, we'll punish you by telling you about our podcast. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to do that today. And let's get into it. So let's start simple, shall we? Or do we want to show everything? Maybe we show one of everything and then we'll get into it, right?
Yeah. We could go through and kind of show them what we have lined up in case people did not see them on social media already. And then we can explain how the things happen.
Okay, perfect. Good. So I'll look. Let's look at my screen first. So look at Evan's screen. So here is a very basic type of visualizer style example. Hello, everybody, and welcome. Motion Design Hotline Week.
There, yeah.
I like when it goes slow-mo.
This is why I'm playing the export.
That's actually pretty wise. I should have done that. Hello, everybody, and welcome. Here is Design Hotline this week. Like a visualizer type thing. So we're really trying to just turn the audio into something visual. There are two kind of visual elements going on here. We've got the bars around and then the logo in the middle. Podcast promo that are doing stuff. So that's one of the things that I'm bringing to you. And then the other one is a little bit more advanced.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Motion Design Hotline this week.
It's got typography. It's got, again, another spectrum type deal down here, styled in a very different way, but very similar type of idea. But just in general, if we talk about kind of the three, what do we want to talk about? Like the three components, what makes a good kind of visualizer here? Like you need to have something that tracks with the audio. So be it the waveform, be it a spectrum, and then the actual text of the typography of what's being said, because most people are going to be watching their social media with their audio off. So
right.
Anyway,
yeah, most of your audience for this purely audio thing are going to watch this visual promo for that audio thing without the audio.
Yeah.
So make sure that you plan for that, because that's just the reality we live in. The darkest timeline.
Well, and as confusing as it is, but the audio reacting stuff tells you, "Ooh, I should turn the sound on for this."
Right.
All right, Kyle, let's have a look at your screen. Let's say the more advanced version of the stuff.
Well, so I think that, the animation in mine is perhaps a little more straightforward, but because I was focusing on the workflow of some of these components here, you might notice here in the center of my screen is After Effects, and you can see that this purple layer right here, which is the wave file, not an MP3, a wave file. And that's what I have fed into After Effects. And you can see it has these little markers here that say E and K on it. And those are when one of us starts talking. And then most of the animation and color changes and stuff like that of my promo, I'll go ahead and just play it muted here so that you can see what's happening. Those are all set up to, that stopped playing for some reason. I'll just open that back up. Thanks for, because I
Lover one and
changed the name of it after I did that. Smart. So you can see Evan's talking here, and so everything is pink. And then when I start talking in just a second, there's a little animation, and everything turns over to yellow. So mine is set up to streamline this as much as possible, because typically you're going to be making one of these and releasing a new one every week or whatever the case may be. And you don't want to have to keep manually animating this stuff, manually retiming it. So as much as possible, trying to streamline some of those aspects of that repeatable animation.
Yeah, so we might use language today like round trip. So like if you're evaluating a workflow and you say, what's the round trip of the workflow? That's how long it takes for you from the start of it sort of to the end of it to then batch another one through if you had to. I think mine are down around like 15 minutes per. I mean, the more the manual keyframes is kind of hit or miss. But the first one is definitely like a 15-minute procedure. So
I would say, so in this case, in my example, the captions are being done in Premiere. Those aren't automated in this example, but for mine, literally all you would have to do to update the animation is bring the new audio file in and make sure that the markers are updated, or just make sure that you swap it in the right way, and then just set your render area. That's the only thing you would have to change.
Right, and those markers can even come from the actual editing software itself.
Absolutely, right? Should. After Effects is an objectively worse place to make those markers than either Audition or Premiere.
Yeah, so if you're sending it out, you send it out with the markers. The markers are there. They're part of the wave file. That might bake some people's potato, but,
You know what bakes my potato? I see Oliver said in the chat that TikTok just added an option to default the app to have the sound off. And I mean, maybe I'm misunderstanding something about the platform, but isn't the whole point of it originally was that it was like music? It has a music note in the logo.
Right. Well, that's just kind of that's how we're supposed to be using the TikTok. Anyway, let's dance our way into After Effects. I'll get into the simple example and we'll take it from there. We'll kind of eschew our frustrations with modernity for a moment.
I will not, sir.
Okay, good. So here is what I would call like a super basic example. We've recorded sort of 5 fake intros to podcasts. So if you need some MP3s to play with, download the project files and you can start having fun with those yourself.
Except you should use them as WAV files and not MP3s.
Right. I mean, I turn them into MP3s because, I try to work with
likes to live on the edge.
I like to live with the standard that things are usually delivered to me. Kyle, I live in a pig pen, and that's why I like to show things off this way. So I'm just going to make a new composition. I'm going to try to make this the duration of the maximum length that I think someone might send a clip to me in this stuff. And let's grab one of these down here. You can examine the waveform by tapping LL. You can mess with the audio levels by hitting just regular L, but LL and L are going to bring up our levels.
But if I can opine a little bit more, again, please do not do audio editing in After Effects.
Yeah.
Do it in Audition or Premiere before you come in here.
Right.
Please, please, please.
Please. Oh, CJ has a question, Kyle. What is the benefit of a wave or WAV versus MP3 or
WAV? So
WAV.
any heavily compressed format like MP3, or this is a great time to bring it up, things like H.264 video files. These formats are very highly compressed. PNG sequences as well. They're very highly compressed, and your software, be it After Effects, Premiere, whatever, it has to work to uncompress it as you are playing that file, and so it's going to be slower. So a file that has a slightly larger file size but is not compressed is going to be much better to work with in these apps.
Right. And like there's also loss, right? There's like lossy things that go on. So if you can, if you're working with someone who makes a podcast, get them to send you the uncompressed cut of the stuff.
Even if they don't, I went ahead and took these MP3s that Evan made and just ran them through Media Encoder to make WAV files so that they would be faster to work with in After Effects. Pro tip.
Life hacks. Hacks. Okay, so we've got our MP3 down there. Now I'm showing the wave function down here, the waveform, just so we can confirm there is audio here, right? This is one gripe that I hear people say all the time. I can't tell if there's audio here or not because when I press play, nothing happens.
It's all about
when you press play, something should happen. You should hear it. If you don't, check out your preview settings and just make sure that it will indeed play some audio for you. It's got the big thing turned on here. Helpful. Or if you've got the phone here turned off, right, it won't display a waveform. So just so you know. Again, further life hacks, so many. So I want to turn this into something visual. There's two effects that are really nice for this. We've got the audio spectrum and the audio waveform. I'm saying it weird, so you'll remember it. You say it right. So Kyle, what's the big difference between spectrums and waveforms?
Well, they depict different things.
Yeah. So the waveform here, let's call up, maybe that's the easier one to look at first.
Primo.
We have to first point the effect to look at the specific audio and
Podcast promos.
you notice how this kind of looks like this. So these two are measuring just amplitude of the thing as it passes by over time. That's what we got going by. And right now it doesn't look like much, right? It's a real nasty looking thing. It's a nice pink line. If that's your aesthetic, great. You can do a couple other things with it. So you could say, show me just the left side, just the right side. You can display it as digital bars.
Kyle, did you
like that? You can display it as analog dots.
do you know that Primo?
I love how I keep hearing you say my name, but it's not you.
It's me, but it's not me.
Yep.
It's my digital ghost in the machine here. So we can crank up the maximum height, but I want you to think about what this is as merely a base from which we will build other things, right? That's all that these are doing. So you could set this to be different colors. I'm going to set them primarily just to be white and white, and I'll crank that softness all the way down to make it super sharp.
Does not actually mean.
And already it's looking like something else. So if this is the type of base form you want to work with, maybe start with the audio waveform, or you might want to start with the audio spectrum. So we do the same thing. We point this at fake podcast .mp3, and then we start to tweak this up to taste. These effects, because they are reading the audio, what they are able to show you is dependent on the audio itself. So let's say, for example, you have a very, we'll say, poorly conformed type of audio, right? If it's just totally raw audio, it might not work as nice.
It's more of a,
as we'll say, as something that has sort of been equalized, right? Like
Right.
the graph might be all over the place, huge peaks, huge valleys, totally blown out on one side of the spectrum. So a way that you want to kind of correct for that is here in the start and end frequencies. So I will start adjusting this, and you can start to see how this image, this picture is like stretching, if that makes sense.
And let's maybe very quickly give a little explanation of what we are depicting here and why you're adjusting the frequencies.
Right. So this is primarily human voice, the voice of the human, and
that's either the first or the
human vocal range is within a certain frequency spectrum, right? So the start frequency, you could start it at the frequency 0, but as baritone as I am, I cannot produce anything in that area, right? And you can see how tiny the humps are there, right? Like you might even want to start the frequency off at like 200 or something.
Yeah.
You know, what is it? It's like 200 to 64,000 or 6400.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact ranges. The very quick version is audio sounds that we can hear have numbers associated with them here in terms of the frequency that they vibrate at, basically. High numbers are high frequencies, and low numbers are low frequencies because they have a much wider the amount of time that it takes them to wave through the air is they move slower than high pitched things. Right. That's just how sound work.
That's how sound work. And so for our purposes, right, when we're trying to model that or make something visual out of it, it's important to remember that as you zoom in on that picture, right, that slice, we're only looking at 400 hertz between here, which produces these nice undulating waves. As I stretch that out, it turns into
that's another thing found,
more distinct peaks and valleys. So you have to play with these numbers to make something that's going to be visually good, right? Okay, now speaking of something that's visually good, this straight line thing is not going to cut it. I hate it. I don't like it. Make it stop, make it stop. So I'm going to grab the ellipse tool. I'm just going to kind of hold shift, and we're going to double click on it to make a circle like this. And now the circle, by default, it is adding, so we're kind of cutting into the image. But instead, I'm going to set that to none, and then I'm going to say, hey, put the spectrum around that. And you see that it
past to jars
already looks kind of cool and interesting, right? It's things are already cool and interesting.
And you can do this on an open path as well if you want to just do a straight line in any direction or a weird wavy whatever.
Yeah, and one of the things that I'm going to do is that because wave audio spectrums are asymmetrical, and I don't find that particularly looks great, what I'm going to do is, first off, I'm going to make this into an open path like that, chop, and then I'm going to delete a couple of the arcs, so I'm only looking at
a rebel.
I'm crazy like this. So now I've only got like a quarter of it that I'm looking at, and I'm going to put a mirror effect on here. Plonk. And let's just make sure that this is mirroring in the middle center. And let's just change that old reflection angle around so that it's like this. So we got it flipped once, duplicate it, and we'll flip it twice.
And the reason you chopped it first was because if you kept the full... You could keep the full circle and use the mirror to get a very similar look, but then it would be stretching that spectrum around the entire circle instead of just the little quarter
exactly
that you wanted. Yeah.
And if you wanted this to say like repeat around, in a circle, you might pre-compose and take different copies of it. But there are a lot of ways that you can then tile and redirect and do stuff. Notice we've got a little gap here. Oops, a little gap. So I'm just going to change the frequency bands until it's definitely got one at the start and end of that. Now where'd my mouse go? Kyle,
you tell me.
I've lost my mouse. Oh, wait.
I'm not sure how to help you.
Oh, no, wait. There it is. But it's not moving. Oh, Kyle, this is so embarrassing.
Do you have one of those super advanced magic mice?
No, I don't.
That magically stopped working?
Hold on. You know what we're going to do, Kyle? Because I'm experiencing...
I do know what you're going to do.
Technical difficulties. We're going to jump over to your screen so you can do some stuff.
Okay.
Oh, wait. No, my mouse is free again. Never mind. I'm going to be selfish and I'm going to hog this thing.
Psych! We're really keeping everybody on their toes today.
I pranked you. I don't know what that's all about. Tina, it's on your desk. Oh, goodness. We're having a wacky time here. So... Look, we've got this thing. It's doing pretty much what we want. I want to style this up a little bit more. So what I'll probably do is actually pre-compose this. So we can put in a little pre-comp here. And then I might, within this, I want to kind of recolor it in a way. So I'm going to make, let's see. You know what? In the interest of time, I want to speed us up and I'll just show you kind of the construction here of this original one. So the bands are a little bit chunkier, they're a little bit thicker, and I have on here placed a layer that's just over top of everything, and all it is it's just a black solid, and I've used the layer styles. So if you come on down to the layer styles, you can put a gradient overlay set to angle that goes from like one color and wraps around. And then I've used an adjustment layer over top of that using our best friend, Colorama.
Yes. And
the Colorama is now remapping those black and white values to a rainbow. And I've got that rainbow moving around in a circle. So I'm using the phase shift to just make that turn all the way around so that we can enjoy some undulation or something happening, right, while nothing's kind of going on. Now, from there, we take that one comp and duplicate it a few times. Make sure you only have audio coming out of one of them, or you'll be triplicating your audio. But then we set one of them here, for example, to just a nice Gauss in the house type of blur. It's very subtle what's going on back there right now, right? So this could be a little bit less blurry, a little bit more blurry, but it's causing a bit of a glow. Then the next one, the next level of glowiness we've got going on is a Gauss blur and CC radial fast blur. So we get these lines, these striations coming out. Now these are both set to add, and they are over top of a little gradient and some noise. So that ends up being this nice sort of shiny disco ball going on here. And then finally, we just kind of have the regular version of that with a little glow. If you want to dissect these things yourself, please download motiondesignhotline.com, get your hands on all these files, play around. And
today's isn't up yet, but they're usually up about 10 minutes after the show ends.
Yeah. And so, that's one way. All I have to do is change out this audio. Everything else will update. I might have to adjust the frequencies of the audio spectrum, but that's pretty much it, right? That's one file, one menu, 2 clicks, you're done. The other little bit that's going on is the audio amplitude. So I'm going to hopefully knock this out real quick. If you want to turn your audio into data or data, all you have to do is make sure there is audio in the composition. You go to Animation, Keyframe Assistant, Convert Audio to Keyframes. It's going to think about that for a while. Don't interrupt it while it's thinking. If your info panel is closed, you're not going to see that it's thinking. With a very fast computer, you're not going to notice it's thinking because it happens almost instantaneously, but a process is happening, and if you interrupt it, it will be sad. And then you'll be sad, so don't do that. I don't know if this is as much a problem anymore, but it used to be a bigger problem that this would happen.
Not sure.
Yeah. I remember, Kyle, because I made a tutorial on the YouTube about it. Got this question a lot. Why is it only done half of my thing? Well, I don't know. Did you interrupt it? Yes. So,
well, there you go.
There's your answer. So from there, what this produces is left channel, right channel, both channels. And if we just have a little look-see at the old graph editor here, we're going to look at the value graph. And these are literally the values of the waveform. How loud is it at a certain frame? Now, from here, what you need to do is kind of massage the data or data, whichever. You can massage command or data. That's fine. So we've got what is the linear, and then we're observing this value and changing the value from 5 to 20 to a value of 0 to 100. That just makes it a little bit easier to work the math of it because I'm always dealing with a number between 0 and 100. The 5 to 20 number is just the minimum and kind of maximum values. So if I just go ahead and show you what the difference is now, it's a little bit hard to tell what just happened, but this new line, this new purple line is what happened. And this makes it like bottom out and become flat, but then the peaks are a little bit more substantial. But we can then link things to that. For example, the scale.
It's just numbers.
It's all just numbers, folks. It's nothing to be afraid of. It's just numbers. They're big numbers, and we know big numbers are scary, but, same with a lot of decimal points. That's a frightening thing to see. But all I'm doing is I'm saying variable D equals that number that comes out of here. I'm smoothing it.
And you didn't, okay, so the smooth, up until the smooth, you literally just pick whipped over to that other value.
Exactly. Right? This is just an address. It's just where we're going to find the data. Then we smooth it, and smoothing is going to just even out some of those bumps. Then I divide it by 5, and then I'm just adding that to whatever the value of this scale is. And that is going to cause this thing to bump up and down. Your numbers are going to vary a lot, right? They're going to be different. I would say bring it in as a variable, play with what you want to see it happen, what you want to see happen with it, and you'll get to something that is pleasant. It's not going to be perfect right away. You got to massage the numbers. But what are we at? I'm at 4 clicks, and it'll be you'll be sending it out the door, right, at this point. So
cool.
Change audio, point to the audio, turn it into keyframes, and then you'll just have to connect. Well, it'll already be connected. So that's 3 clicks. So that's for that phase. Then we're going to kick it over to Premiere because I've talked too much, Kyle. Let's tell the good people about how to make the Premiere.
Real
side
quick
of
before
this.
you
Okay.
abandon this and pitch it
Okay.
back to me, I did see a good question from Umacorn here.
Okay.
Can you create separate pieces and link the two voices to each piece instead of having the one showcase both?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So like if you want to maybe open up that pre-comp with the spectrum again, or yeah, exactly what you've done in here.
Yeah.
In the case of the example Evan just did, you would just make 2 copies of that the spectrum visualizer thing,
Mhm.
and just you would have 2 separate audio files, one for each person, and just make sure you point the thing to that.
Yeah, so here you can see I've got the waveform, and what I've done is I've used that levels to chop down and then up and then down and then up, right? Ideally, if you're exporting this out of something, give me both speakers independently. Then you have
Right.
2 different wave files to look at. But you can manufacture that in here. We didn't have very much crosstalk, so it wasn't a big deal. But if you do, the only way to do that is to get the raw audio out of the thing. But yeah, you just hook it up to 2 things. It'd be right as rain. But yeah, speaking of speakers, let's hear Kyle speak for a while.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so let me bring us back to Premiere. I'm not going to get too deep in the weeds of this because I think that there's more interesting stuff for us to be covering in After Effects, but I do just want to show you. So this is my piece that I did, and my After Effects export just left a big gap here so that I could create the captions in Premiere. And I just did this using the very standard Premiere caption workflow. So when you bring anything with audio into Premiere, it's going to auto transcribe that for you. I did a touch of cleanup here just because we had a few specialized words and we're making some jokes and stuff. So there's a few things that I needed to kind of clean up and make sure that it knew that we were 2 different people and things like that. But
it can be hard to tell that on a podcast.
It can sometimes. Except I say pasta and you say pasta. So that's the tip off, folks.
You say potato, I say potato.
So it there are a lot of tutorials that you can look up about all the ins and outs of making captions here in Premiere. One thing I do want to point out is that a source file can have a transcript, and that is, even if that's the only file in your timeline might have a different transcript than your source file. It can. So if you are doing manual cleanup on one or the other, you just kind of want to be mindful that you're doing it in the place that matters in your case. But once you have a transcript made, you come over to captions, and I've already made them here. Perhaps I will just quickly make a duplicate for you and get rid of them. I'll get rid of this subtitle track here. And so once you have a transcript made, then you just tell it to create some captions, and you can play with the styles in here. One thing that you can do is create your own styles, and I ended up doing that for this. So I created one called Hotline Evan and Hotline Kyle, and I was kind of playing around with them. They're the same, I just made them different colors. And you can dial in, the typeface and all that stuff. These are things that you create in the Essential Graphics panel. So if you don't have one existing already, you just choose none, and then you make the style, and then you can kind of apply it, which I'll show you in a second. And then you create the captions, which doesn't take too long. And then you'll see in this case, like, these aren't really styled the way I want. So that would be a time when I would come into the Essential Graphics panel and I would adjust them the way I want. And then you'll see right up here, it says track style. Okay. And so once you have styled that the way you want, you could create a new style by creating it right there. You give it a name, and then you can push it to all of the captions on this track, for example. So let me go ahead and change this one to Hotline Evan, and then I'm going to push that style to everything on the track. And now it's all updated to that style. And so if you make a change anywhere along the way, you can just kind of keep updating that as you go. So that's all I did to make this whole thing. It does take a few clicks in here, but it's pretty straightforward. They're not the most amazing or most dynamic captions, but they're 100% functional, and they take very little work because Premiere transcribes these for you automatically. And once you've set up a style, if you're going to be using that every time, it's going to be, pretty clean to just apply it. Really, the only thing you might have to do is kind of clean up some of the language or some of the line breaks. I will point that out real quick, because that's the thing that some folks don't know about. Let's say like right here, maybe this was actually where I started talking and it didn't pick up on that. You can just find that spot in the script, and there's a little split button right here. And so you can split it into a different segment, and that way it knows that when it creates those captions, it will break that into a new clip. Or in this case, I actually want those to be recombined back into one, so I'll merge them. So a lot of this is, as speedy as working through your transcript is. So assuming people speak clearly and you're not using a lot of jargon that Premiere doesn't understand, it should go pretty fast for that aspect of it.
So I would say, in that first example, I would say the majority of the time, if you're bringing in something new, is going to be spent in getting the transcript good.
Mm-hmm.
But if I can make a recommendation for people who are making podcasts, you should be transcribing your podcast anyway.
Probably.
That's a really useful thing for just getting more out of the thing that you've made. Kyle, we have never transcribed any of our episodes of Creatures and Creatives, but that show defies transcription for many reasons.
What's that, Evan? Creatures and Creatives? That sounds like a very cool podcast that people should probably be listening to, or at least watching the promos for.
That's right.
Yeah.
And these promos are very, I'll say, technically complex. So
and content-wise, they might be a little spicier than this show, so we'll just give that advisement.
Right. We advise that if you are PG-13 and above, enjoy our podcast, or you'll be really cool. Anyway, okay. So, but I'm trying to think. We've got half an hour left on the show.
Mm-hmm.
Where do we want to go next?
Why don't you dive into your example, and then maybe aim for 10 minutes.
Okay.
With yours. How's that feel?
One of the things with this method, when we are turning the transcript into text that is changing, we don't have a huge amount of control over it. So there's not a lot of animation to it. There's not a lot of timing wise. So
I will say a little teaser. I have a tool that I will show later in the show that does help with that in Premiere.
A tease.
Yep.
But generally, if this is a comedy-based podcast, or if it's something where the cadence is really important, the cadence of Subtitles is for accessibility and readability. The cadence of typography or kinetic typography is usually impact-based on when the thing is hitting. So let's go to the Evan screen, and I'll just play you through what I've got here.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Motion Design Hotline. This week, it's all about Primo podcast promos.
So really trying to sync up Primo podcast promos to show up when I'm saying the words. So you're in luck. After Effects full of text animation. Fantastic feature of the program. So what you want to do is just create, step one, you probably want to get the transcript of this, right? Which you can export as a .txt just right out of Premiere, right? Actually, Kyle, you've got it in front of you there, if you wouldn't mind.
Absolutely, yes. So it's right at the edge of the screen here. I might move this over just a little bit to make sure it's more visible. In your text panel in Premiere, in your transcript, you can click this little 3 dots right here, and then you have a variety of export options. So you can send it to a text file or a CSV. And then depending on if you are using something that's a little more captions capable, once captions are created, you have some other export options in there. You can export to what's called an SRT file, which is a way to export caption data specifically.
Yeah. So then we just have to copy and paste the stuff. So we don't have to type it out. You can copy and paste right out of the text editor inside of Premiere, but it's just a little bit clunkier to get inside and do that. And, if you can have fewer programs open at a time, then you're going to be marginally happier. So with your text file, copy and paste out of that. And we're literally breaking up the text into the chunks that we want. So in this case, I have used the block text. So we are clicking and dragging with our text to create our text tool in order to create a nice block. And then we copy and paste into that. And if I just open up into one of these, there are a few things that are happening just animation wise. So first off, in your text animator, if you've heard us cover text animators before, then you might be familiar with some of the things, but let's assume that maybe you've never used the text animator at all. When you create it, you're going to say animate and then which property you want to change. In this case, I've gone with scale. If we twirl into animator 1, you can see this is the scale command, make everything 0, 0. And then the range selector is what you are actually going to be animating on and off. Now, I've got mine set to subtract, which allows me to then sort of animate the end of this thing. So let's go ahead and just delete all of the keyframes out of this one. And so if I change this end value, you can see boop, 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 beep, pop, boop, boop. The things are showing up. So let's just go ahead and set a keyframe here at the start. Actually, come down to the end of this thing. So that's the last word, best, right? So that's where I want it to be 100% all the way on. See how that lines up.
Kyle, did you know that primo does not actually mean best?
That's pretty close, right? 7 out of 10, right?
Did you know that
Primo is lagging. So let's bring that forward like this, right? So we just want to add as many keyframes as it takes to get us close.
Kyle, did you know that primo does not actually mean best?
Depending on the words, you're going to add more of those. You're going to add fewer of them. We still want to work in terms of percent, because then we can simply either turn this into a preset in your effects and presets. So if you come into your various animators, grab your more options, your animators, and you can go up here and you can say, save animation preset, apply that to the other text elements, or just copy and paste this on down the line and change the text out. So that's a great way to make sure that you are getting a lot of bang for your buck with this stuff. And all you're going to have to manually do is switch out the words, put in the keyframes, make sure that everything is lining up. I've been a bit of a fancy lad here in that I've got two animators that one of them is looking at that end selection of the other. So I'm able to kind of piggyback. I can do the work once, and this one will be doing more work because this one is dealing with scale. So it's scaling up, and I've cranked the ease high and ease low up. So
Kyle, did you know that primo
they're really snappy to come on. But the other one, animator 2, if we look at that, it's got an ease high of -100. So it's doing something totally different, but it's changing color as it comes up because I thought that would look nice. And I'll say this, it's filling the color with black. What? What do you mean, Evan? Well, because the text is white, it fills it with black. I use the tint in order to make this thing go pink to yellow. So now it's easier for me to copy and paste this, hit the swap colors for Kyle's lines, and now it's a totally different thing. Totally different. Oh boy,
Nice thought.
So efficient with my time. But again, the round trip on this one is a bit more like 20 to half an hour, depending on how much massaging this requires. But at least we don't really have to bounce software to software with this one, right? And I'll say you can see that we've got a different form of waveform going on here. Some blorpy bars, I've called them. I've called this the blorpy bar. And what we're doing with that is we've got an audio spectrum going on. It's mirrored. I've used an echo. So if we go ahead and solo what this looks like, kind of looks like that before we start blorping it up.
Kind of fatten it up.
Yeah. So then on top of that, I use an adjustment layer, and the adjustment layer is using a fast box blur to make it blurry, then a levels to make it blorpy. And the levels, we're just crunchitizing the alpha together in here. And then after that,
Take notes on that, folks. Blur and then levels crunch the alpha. That is the secret to blorpiness, wherever you may want it.
Wherever you want to be blorpy, that's how you do it. And then I tagged it with a roughen edges, and the roughen edges itself, I've got the random seed with a little expression that is just randomizing it, so that even when we're standing still, it's still like brrr, doing that. So it looks like, oh, maybe there's some audio static coming in, and it's it's responding in some way. But this is I just wanted to include this example so you can see that, well, these both start with the audio spectrum and they go in totally divergent ways, because it's just an ingredient that we're starting with, and then we're going to affect it the rest of the way. Like you could be
changing those values in there. You can really create quite very different things.
Yeah, you can make it. You make it like a robotic thing. You can make it look like lightning. You could mix in a fractal noise in there if you want to make it look like clouds or fire or all sorts of stuff. Really embrace your inner Winamp skin designer when you do this. That's something only 90s kids will get. Kyle, let's kick it into something, let's say, a little bit fancier.
A little bit fancier, but fancy up front so that you can keep it very simple later. This is the kind of thing that I would build if I had to hand this off to somebody else, for example.
This is the mullet technique. Fancy up front, simple in the back.
Yeah. So I did kind of tease our Creatures and Creatives promo here, and I want to point out, because what today's example is actually a slightly simplified version of this, because we have 4 folks on ours. And so as you can imagine, that would add up having to do that manually, right? And so for each person, there is a defined color. And you'll notice we have this little animation up here of this D20 turning, and then there's the little stars thing. So every time that it changes speakers, it triggers that little animation, and the die turns and the letter on the die changes, as well as the color changing. So we're going to dig into some of that stuff right here on my example. So you can see here, this is one of the same clips that we've been hearing. And so we've got this same audio spectrum example here. Just to kind of piggyback on what Evan was talking about a second ago, defining the start and end frequency is a big part of defining the look here. The frequency bands, if you want this very sparse, you can turn that way down. If you want it very dense, you turn that way up, okay, to where you can make it thick and a solid thing, or it can be lines like this. And then here's one that really determines the way this looks: audio duration in milliseconds. This is how big of a span of time are you looking at any given time. If you turn this way down, you're going to end up with like a very quick thing, because it's kind of just looking at this tiny little magnification. And so it's just going to be kind of, almost look like a volume meter. But if you turn this way up, then you're going to start getting almost like a very long sort of averaged value at a certain point. It's not going to look like much because you're looking at too much. So dialing in those values to a point, in my case, something like 100, I kind of didn't veer too far from the defaults on mine, because that wasn't the point of this one. But don't be afraid to get in here and play with these until it gets you the look that you're after.
I guess we should probably also mention, you may notice sometimes like an errant spike that happens in these, and you tame those using these features.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And you have a maximum height here, so you can decide how high it was. In my case, I was okay with it occasionally like spiking, but then I used some track mats to kind of frame this in. Again, we've dug into that stuff in other episodes, not going to get too deep into it today. Feel free to explore the project file yourself. But one thing that I am doing here on this spectrum is that both of these colors, both the inside and outside, they're just linked back to some other color control. And so every time Evan's talking, it's pink, and every time Kyle is talking, it's yellow. And that is all being controlled by these little E and K markers that are on the original audio file. I just put those on there. Again, do this in Premiere or Audition before you come in here. And so you don't necessarily have to build this the same way, but this is a big part of thought process here. So I knew that I was going to have a couple different things being driven by this change between speakers, okay? And, here we only have 2 speakers, so it's a little simpler. If you have 4, especially, or other, some other multiple number of speakers, you really want to be mindful of how you are working through this. And so what I did is created, let's bring this audio file up here so we can see this. I created this thing called color control, and it's actually a text layer, and it's set to be a guide layer. So it's showing us something up here, and I'm just using that as a visual for myself, and then that can drive some other things. Now, what I did is in the source text of this layer, I put this big kind of scary looking expression, and this is a little bit, specialized, but most of the meat of this is something that you could get off of any Dan Ebert's response to a post somewhere over the last 20 years. If you look for marker-based animation in After Effects or marker-driven animation in After Effects, you'll be able to find variations on this kind of code here. Basically, what this is saying is look at a certain layer. This could be on this layer, but I wanted to look at that other layer. And then this code here is saying, look at the markers. And if it's kind of numbering all of these markers, and if it's not marker 0, then, move to the next one. Every time you get a new marker, check it to see if something, and then do that thing. Down here at the bottom, I'm telling it to look at that marker comment, okay? Comments right here. E, for example. This marker's comment is E, and the other one is K, and they're all just timed up. And so this text layer is showing us whether it is currently it's gotten a marker for E and it has not yet gotten another marker. And then as soon as it gets another marker, it's going to check and boom, that one is labeled K. And so now this layer is showing us who's currently speaking. And this is as much just a reference for me as I was building out the other functionality, okay?
Right, and it proves that the switching is working.
Exactly, which is a big part. If you're building something that has any kind of complexity, it never hurts to make something that kind of helps check part way so that you know that you're not building, some 40 lines of code thing, and the thing that drives that isn't actually happening.
Right.
Just kind of a good little check. But I actually used this little letter right here as the condition for some of the other things. So this layer has a few effects on it, all right? It's got one called Even Color, and this is just one of the color controls. You can go to Effect, Expression Controls, Color Control. That's all this is right here. And so there's one called Even Color and Kyle Color. And so these are things that you'd be able to change universally right here. If I wanted all of the Kyle colors to be bright green instead, I could just change it right here. And this is driving everything else in the rest of the comp. Looks like my name is not tied to it. This didn't need to be that dynamic, but you get the idea. And then I have one other color control here, but this one is the thing that actually determines what's going out to the other ones. Again, we have a bit of code here, but it's not that much. So this code right here says, okay, I'm creating a variable called text, and that is looking at the source text of this layer, which we just looked at, right? And then I'm creating 2 other variables just so that I don't have to reference, hex codes or anything in here. This makes it easier. You can absolutely establish colors in expressions, but it seems easier to just have a little color control, right? So I said color Evan is that one. Color Kyle is that one. And all I'm doing in this case is just pointing it to that, okay? And then this is just one little conditional check. So if the text that you're looking at is E, then do color Evan. Otherwise, do color Kyle. Again, we only have 2 options here, so it's pretty straightforward. If you're doing one with 6 people, you're going to have to write a more advanced conditional expression here. Right. But that is for another day.
Yeah, you might use something like the try catch.
Yep.
You might use the case type of thing. There's a lot of switching methodologies that you might deploy. If you feel you're ready for that, we don't need to get into it. You already know how to Google it. But let's start simple with our lives. How does the animation part work? That the
Exactly.
triggering animation with markers, I think, is something that people want to do a lot.
Uh-huh. So I wanted to kind of explain this because it's the simpler part. Remember, our source text is looking at those markers and then just kind of echoing whatever the comment is, right? And then anything getting the color is tied back to this color control right here. And so that's driving that stuff. Now, driving animation with markers is a little bit more complicated, but not too much so. In this case, I've done what I think is the simplest version of it by pre-composing our animation.
Ooh.
So for both Evan and Kyle, I created just a quick little pre-comp that does the intro animation, and then as soon as it gets to the end here, that's the end of it. So I could have done some more complex stuff in here. See, there's just a little bit of position move and that little kind of swoosh, right? But I could have put whatever I want in here, because as long as it's contained in this pre-comp, it's all going to happen with the way that we're driving this. Because we are driving this on time remapping. So the way this works, yeah, and very quickly too, the opacity of each of these, before we even get into time remapping, this is also looking back at that text layer, that color control text layer. And so the Evan pre-comp says, if that text layer says E right now, then your opacity is 100, otherwise 0. And then Kyle's is just the opposite. If that text says K, you're 100%. You can see the values here, right? So let's get into the cooler part, this time remapping. So I know this is scary looking. There's quite a bit going on in here. Let me kind of get over here so that you can see it better. So we're establishing a couple things here. We have a pre-comp duration, okay? That's something that we need to feed into this. That is the duration of this particular layer. Since it's pre-composed, you're not really going to see it very well, but let me make a let me quickly make a copy of this and turn off the time remapping. Remember, this is a teeny tiny little pre-comp. It's only like 12 frames long. So that's what it's looking at, is the duration of this particular layer. And then I was also looking at the audio layer here because we're going to use that. Remember, we're looking at the markers from that to drive this other stuff. And so then there's a lot of scary looking code in here. It's very similar to the other one, basically saying, if you have gotten a marker, then do that thing until you get another marker, and then do that thing. That's what all of this establishes. And from that, we're going to use this other function called linear that we've talked about before. And linear is the magic sauce that connects one kind of property to another kind of property. I know we're getting a little short in time, so I'm not going to get too technical here. But if you look at this, what we're connecting here is we're connecting time, actual time, to the duration of this pre-comp. And so every time you get a new marker, it plays this particular pre-comp from the beginning of itself until it's over, and then it stops there. And it is technical in here, and this is not something I expect a lot of people to write from scratch, but that is the logic behind what's working.
Yeah.
And so each of those have that same code. Again, you can dig into this and explore that for yourself, but that is the concept behind what's happening here. And it's pretty dynamic. I could change the length of one of these and it would adapt itself right there. So good for streamlined. But as I said, all I'd have to do is replace this audio file. You could replace it directly and then right click and update markers if you wanted to, or just replace the file. You just need to make sure that all those references are looking at the right thing. And then just make sure that your render chops off at the end there.
Now we've only got like a couple of minutes.
Yep.
Can we jump into your Premiere real quick and I guess just
get
show
that
people
tease?
show people the results of that plugin and what it is and where they can get it, I guess.
Absolutely. So I didn't want to put it on my released version because I felt like that would be a little bit of an overpromise. But there is a tool here, and I'm gonna play this muted so I can talk over it. Not recording. Oops. Mute. And this is a way to get much more dynamic subtitles in here, and you'll see it's highlighting each word as it's said. I am using a tool called Submachine, and you can check that out for yourself. It's from Creative Workflow Solutions. So you can go to creativeworkflowsolutions.com/submachine, and it works right here in Premiere. It is, there are some steps to make it work just because of the nature of the way Premiere works, but it's kind of riding on top of the captions functionality and Mogurt functionality to create a separate cut of the Mogurt on each word to work through your phrases in a highlighted way, but it automates that for you.
It's a wacky bit of business, but Kyle, our wacky bit of business has ended. So I hope
alas.
hope people have enjoyed that. I hope this has shown you kind of the building blocks to start creating your own templates, or if you're working for podcasts or you're promoting them, then you can create interesting and unique things that maybe elevate and help stand out from the just plain automated stuff that a lot of web apps can deliver for you. That's our goals here on The Progress, is to make you all marginally better at motion design. So hopefully this has helped. If you have an area that you're stuck on, you can always get at us anytime. Go to motiondesignhotline.com to learn more about the show. Check out the archives. Oh boy, we're running out of time real quick. I'm Evan Abrams.
Check out our 3D contest.
Contest. Yep. We got a contest going on. Follow us on social media. We're going to tell you more about that coming up. Find me on the internet at EC Abrams. Find him at Kylosaurus Rex. We're going to say goodbye for now. Until next time, stay creative, be kind to each other. We'll see you all around the internet. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
I hope we don't get cut off.